let me just list a couple. So Cloud from FS7, Amnesia. Terra from FS6, Amnesia. Morgana. I don't know if you probably never played World Ends With You, right?
No, I haven't.
That was another Tetsuya Nomura game. So yeah, he has Amnesia. Roxas from Kingdom Hearts.
That's the guy that I got confused with.
Yeah,
right?
it's Sora. Everybody's Sora too. Right?
Everyone's Sora.
Yeah. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Red Essence Games podcast. I'm Nik.
I'm Arman.
And we are game developers as well as lifelong gamers. And in this episode, we have a very special one for you guys because we are going to be talking about JRPG good and bad mechanics. Both Arman and I are like huge JRPG gamers, so it'll be fun to kind of dissect what we're thinking is making a good or bad mechanic, and also maybe how the mechanics have changed in JRPGs over the years.
Yep.
We're also going to talk about how we've incorporated some of these JRPG mechanics into our game, Traveler's Refrain. And if you haven't heard of Traveler's Refrain yet, it is a game that you can wishlist now on Steam. And essentially, our game is about a wandering musician who travels to a mystical forest in search of his long-lost love. And if you're really into more of like an old-school action RPG type of game, but with a modern flair and feel, then our game is for you. So go check that out on Steam, where you can wishlist now.
All right, yeah, so let's get started here, Nik.
Yeah.
Can you explain to us a JRPG? What is it, and what are the mechanics of JRPGs?
I feel like that's a good question because I think in the JRPG community, that's kind of a contested topic in itself. In my mind, I think a JRPG is a game that revolves around a party-based combat system, and there's a bunch of tropes that I think we're going to kind of dive into with JRPGs specifically, like stuff that they just like reuse over and over. But I think the party system is probably one of the biggest ones.
Mm-hmm.
I know turn-based combat is like, usually goes hand in hand with JRPG, but I do think sometimes an action-based game can be considered a JRPG.
There's a blurred line, right? Yeah, I think there's blurred lines everywhere, and obviously like the word Japanese kind of adds. A lot of the JRPGs are kind of goofy, and they have these weird plot lines and things that are kind of more normal in like Japanese anime, like different tropes and storylines and things like that. So I think that really sets it apart. But I also think that everybody can interpret it in their own way.
Sure.
But traditionally, I think a JRPG is, in my opinion, more turn-based. Anything where you can switch between different characters at the same point. Like, it's not like you switch from one character then to another in a different scene.
Yeah.
I think they all have to be present, and they all kind of contribute in some way. There's also like a leveling system and like a progression system and different classes and things like that. I think that's what typically sets it as a JRPG in my opinion.
Do you feel like a JRPG necessarily has to be made by a Japanese company? Because that's the other thing too. There's some Western devs that have made like JRPG influence games, but are they JRPGs?
I think they're still JRPGs because I think the core foundation is based on traditional JRPG games. So people who love the genre and want to kind of give it their own flavor, they take what the JRPG genre has already built and they sort of put their own take on it, and they kind of throw their own flair and introduce their own gameplay mechanics and try to, find the same audiences that played the old games.
Yeah, I think I'd agree to that. So, I mean, just to like throw out some genres, I mean, I'm sure if you're watching this, you know what JRPG is, but I think we're going to be heavily talking about like the Pokemon franchise, Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, like the big staples, and kind of see the crossover that's happening between them. And we might throw in a few, kind of random ones that we play throughout the years. Yeah. But the other thing I want to mention as well is I think we're probably going to dive into not only gameplay, like the action mechanics, but also storytelling mechanics as well, because there's definitely some tropes in JRPGs, like for example, like the amnesiac protagonist, that kind of helps develop the plot line, and it could also potentially contribute to gameplay mechanics as well in terms of like choices and stuff like that. So I think that's something worth mentioning as well. All right, so I think that's enough like
Overview.
Yeah, let's just kind of dive right into it. So the first thing we brought up, and the first thing I was thinking about, because like you guys in the comments totally ripped me apart for wanting a graph in a type chart in Pokemon games. So I think that's a good one to kind of bring up to begin with, is like elemental types in JRPGs. Right. That's a big trope, and I feel like certain franchises have leaned into them more heavily than others. And in some games, I feel like they even have like electric, water or fire, but it doesn't even really do anything. So in general, like, how do you feel about type matching in games?
I think type matching, it adds a lot of variety to the games. But I think with type matching, you have to be really careful, because you need to really build the game around the type matching, because that's what makes it really fun. And I think that sometimes you can get confused, because a water attack might work on an enemy that's colored like orange or red. You assume it's a fire type. You use a water ability and it works, but then you'll encounter another enemy that's like red or orange, and you use a water attack and it's not super effective, or it's not, you don't get bonus damage, and you're kind of left wondering like, well, why did the developer choose to make this enemy weak to water and not that one? And that kind of goes back to your type chart. Is like, for some games where there's just straight up enemies like that, it's hard to understand what works. And this was an issue for me in FF Remake, because I would hit some of the robots, they were like weak to lightning, and then some like weren't.
Yeah.
And it was just really confusing.
They want you to assess every single enemy to be able to understand like what they're weak to. Exactly. So I think that's kind of the main mechanic that they're revolving around. But I definitely get what you mean. It feels like sometimes they just throw in elemental types because they're like, oh, it's this type of game, we have to include that.
Right.
And I think that's also something we might see as a trend throughout some of these games on our list, is like, because traditional JRPGs have established like, oh, this is the way to do things. We've seen this carry throughout a lot of these franchises. And then recently, I feel like there's been kind of this trend to break the mold. And there's some examples of this like later on that we're going to bring up. But yeah, man, I don't know. It's like I'm hit or miss on it too. I feel like sometimes it can be fun if, like you said, it's built around it. So another franchise that heavily does this is Persona. Remember, right? Like, they kind of have a very specific way of like, I don't do that. The thing,
typing system.
Yeah. But the thing about that game that bothered me, honestly, it was like the names of the moves. It's like not clear what they even do. You just have to remember.
They don't describe it.
Man, we should look up like one of the names of like what a fire type attack is, but it's not like fire, you know what I mean? Like in Pokemon, in Final Fantasy, in Dragon Quest, it's all like in Dragon Quest it's sizzle, right? So you kind of know. Persona, what, 5 moves? List of Persona 5 skills. Yeah, this is I totally forgot. I played this a little while ago, but
go to fire.
Yeah, fire. Here we go. Yeah, like fire, the skill's called Agi or Agi. Like light fire damage to one foe, or Agilao. And it's like, I get that you have to, and people are probably going to rip me apart. They're going to be like, you should just remember. But I just feel like when you're so used to a fire move being called, like, ice is Bufu. Like, what is going on, dude? And I get if you're really hardcore into Persona, you're eventually going to like just remember these. And I think after 100
Zio.
I think after 150 hours of playing this freaking game, I definitely started to remember these. But I don't know. It's a kind of a minor gripe. But if your entire combat system revolves around it, it's another one of those things. It's like, I don't know. It doesn't feel super intuitive.
I guess that's also kind of plays back to like the skill aspect too. It's kind of like for more hardcore gamers, they see that more as a challenge of remembering those things, and I can kind of understand that as well.
It just starts to feel more like a you do this to do this, you do this to do this all of the time, instead of like allowing you to experiment a little bit more. Because I do remember feeling like that in Persona 5. Eventually it feels like, okay, I know this type of enemy is always weak to this. I'm literally only gonna ever use the move that the thing is weak to.
Right.
So that's maybe kind of the downside sometimes of the type matching systems. I think game, and I know Persona has like more than just like types, but I remember that being integral to fighting. Like in Final Fantasy, especially the older ones that are more turn-based, there's a lot more of a diverse move set, I feel like, to defeat your foes, right? Like you can, like if an enemy is really quick against you, you can cast haste and speed your party up to attack them quicker, stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know, man. I feel like the type thing is kind of I mean, we
even tried to incorporate this in Traveler's Refrain too. I mean, and this is one of the reasons I fought so hard for, only certain enemies being burnable versus electric, because I think that you need to assess the enemy that you're fighting and pick the right tool for the job. And that's why I think the enemies that have moss or wood, are made of moss and wood or stone, they can get burned. And then the ones that are made of straight up metal, like they can't get burned because of that fact. You kind of have to crush them with a hammer or use an electric weapon.
Yeah, that's been something we're still kind of like playing around with, and I think part of the reason it's been tough to figure that out for our game is because obviously we have a limited amount of enemies to play with, so it kind of feels like, well, if there's only a couple enemies that can be burned, what's even the point of having the lantern burning? So the more enemies I think we develop, I think the more like cohesive we can be. And maybe that's something else that on these bigger projects, I imagine is a pretty difficult thing to figure out, because it's like Persona has like 100 enemies to fight, so they're really having to figure out like, okay, we need a certain set that's weak against this and strong against this, whatever. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is like another example of like game dev is hard, right?
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I guess audience as well, just like take everything we're saying with a grain of salt. This is like definitely a lot of our personal opinions, as well as just like what we think is making something feel fun. Because at the end of the day, that's always the question we're asking ourselves when we're developing, is like, is this a fun mechanic? And that's usually the deciding factor as to whether or not like it gets in the game.
Yeah. What other mechanics are we going to talk about today?
I think another one that's really interesting, that's pretty specific to JRPGs, is a class system. And it's one that certain games, again, like push more into than others. So like even Dragon Quest XI, for example, right? You don't necessarily switch classes, but all of your classes, all the characters kind of have a dedicated preset class.
Right.
And
well, you have that big tree in Dragon Quest XI where you can spec into like two-handers, shields.
That's right.
One-handed and shield, hammers, axes, things like that. So,
but your characters do kind of have like stats that kind of guide them in a direction, right? And then you can kind of stray off from that. So I think that's actually a really cool approach for that. And I think the other thing that's actually really important to bring up as well, just like a little bit of a history lesson, but like honestly, a lot of the mechanics from JRPGs comes from Dungeons and Dragons originally, which is a Western game, you know? So like even Dragon Quest, old Final Fantasy, like they developed these systems from the concept of like picking your class, going on an adventure. You kind of move, like, you don't move on tiles, but you're kind of moving around, you're fighting the enemy, and then you have like these story scenarios. And it is really interesting that when we think about these mechanics, we think of Japanese, but they're kind of originally like a Western thing at the end of the day. So in terms of classes, that's why I was bringing this up as well. That's like a big, like, I'm not a big Dungeons and Dragons player, but I know enough about it to like get that, like, yeah, you when you make your character, you build your class, and it's good against a certain thing or whatever.
You could put your ability points into your
like character. You're a thief, you can like steal things better or like whatever. I think for me, and I mean, I don't know. What do you think? What is your favorite kind of class system in general?
I think two of my favorite class-based games were FF3,
yeah,
and Dragon Quest IX, Sentinels of the Starry Sky. And what I loved about those was it was just fun to like build your party.
Yeah,
and I felt like you could kind of switch your character's jobs on the fly, and it wasn't like a huge holdback because the character would kind of level up quickly to get to where it needed to be.
Yeah.
And I really liked that because you could go into the dungeons and shout out to all my geomancers out there. But as soon as you unlock the geomancer class in FF3, like that one was so much fun.
Yeah.
Because you could like.
I actually never used geomancer.
You never used it?
So I've used it before, but I don't have it in my port. But you can explain, yeah.
Yeah, so it uses the environment you're in to deal like massive AoE damage.
That's pretty cool.
And then you can only really use it for like the mid game because like at the end of the game it gets like a little more useless in my opinion. I don't know, maybe somebody can correct me otherwise in the comments, but that game was so much fun because it didn't have the best storyline. It was just your typical gather the crystals and defeat the darkness type of thing. And I don't even think the characters talk to each other either. Right in 3,
I just played the remaster. I don't think they talk.
No, at least you don't talk.
Actually, you know what I think it is. It's kind of weird. I believe your characters talk back, but your characters don't have their own voices. So it's kind of like it's almost as if the party is just talking back to the person. In the remaster, like the 3DS remaster, the characters are their own characters.
Okay.
But in the original one, it was kind of like they talked for each other, sort of.
Yeah, I remember something like that too. And then the other game I mentioned was Dragon Quest 9.
Yeah.
Which, man, that game was just so awesome. And it wasn't like this grand title, but it was just so like perfect in its own way. You start the game and you get to pick your 4, I think it's like 6 classes or 7. And you get to pick 4 of them and you can recruit them from like the tavern, which I love that like old school kind of feel. But you can change their hairstyles and like change their build and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you can make them, change their, male or female. And then you could basically just set off. And then when you're ready, you could go back and recruit a new person. And pick whatever class you wanted.
Did they? I forget. I didn't beat that one, but I played a bit of it. Did they have like the standard classes, or were they kind of like? Was it like thief, knight, wizard, whatever?
Yeah, it was like warrior, thief, black mage, white mage, and then monk, and I think there was one more. There was one more as well, I believe. So you get to pick whoever you wanted and you brought them along. And then the other cool thing was your armor would appear on you. So not only were you just getting the armor in the games, like a lot of JRPGs you progress as you go, but in this one it was like you get the armor and you equip it and you feel like you've gotten something new. Sometimes you get a piece of armor that you don't like and you just have to put it on anyway. I think there's ways to hide your helmet in that game if I remember correctly.
I think so too.
You can kind of see your character like growing with their armor as well. So I like that aspect.
Dude, Final Fantasy Tactics had one of the most robust class systems I've ever played. And I think to the point, especially in the PSP, it was a kind of a remaster. It was called War of the Lions. I think there was like 20 classes or something crazy like that. And what was so sick was you had your little character and it showed all of the other classes kind of like in a ring and you could like spin them around. And it wasn't like you had different armor sets, but it was like old Final Fantasies where each class just has a different like look to it. And I think that's what's really fun about class-based systems like this as well is you're going to get to a point in the game where you unlock the really badass looking classes. Like at the beginning of the game, you have like knight, right? But then later you have like the dark knight. They have like the black outfit on and stuff. And, oh, dude, it's so sick.
He realizes that he has a darker purpose.
Yeah. What's funny about these systems too is like, I think what's tough is they don't work as well in modern games because it's kind of a silly concept in general that like, oh, my outfit suddenly changed.
Right.
But there's something so cool.
Well, they're not gonna you're not gonna see them like put the stuff on, right?
But the fact that like you go into a menu and just because you changed what they can do, their clothes change is like kind of a silly concept. You know what I mean? It's
like if you became a mage from a warrior, you suddenly get like a top hat or one of those wizard hats.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like in a modern game, like it's like how would they approach that with like realistic graphics so it doesn't look like goofy, you know?
Right.
But actually there is a game that I've played recently that kind of does it. There's it was called Stranger of Paradise. It was the Final Fantasy game that was like it's kind of connected to FF1.
Right.
Yeah, and but the thing with that game was they gave you a bunch of armors because it was like kind of like a Souls game, but they didn't necessarily dictate the class that you were playing as.
Oh.
It was like you could still equip.
Right.
You know,
it was like Dragon Age. That's one that we forgot to mention. Dragon Age.
It wasn't like Dragon Age.
In Dragon Age, you could be a mage, but you could wear like heavy armor.
Yeah.
But your attack
like
casting was slower, which
I
thought was an
remember
interesting
that.
trade-off.
That is cool.
Yeah, so if you were a mage, like you could wear heavier armor, you probably wouldn't get the best spell boost, but you'd have more defense.
Yeah.
So you could last longer in the fights, and your casting was a lot slower. At least in the first one. I can't remember the other ones, honestly, if that was the case, but
dude, the first this is kind of a tangent. The first Dragon Age was so like weird, but it was like unique, you know.
It was unique.
It felt very tactical,
actually.
Yeah, I loved that game too.
You could, and the PC version, you could. I think it was only in the PC version you could pause everything and then like assign a person to go.
No, you could do it because I played it on console.
Okay.
Yeah. It was cool. Yeah, like everything kind of froze and you could kind of reposition people. Right. That was sick, man.
Yeah.
I feel like games are getting a little bit samey in the past couple of years, like because they're all pushing for the action combat. Obviously, FF7 Remake has like that cool like in between, but yeah, I don't know. I haven't played a game like Dragon Age, I feel like, in a long time. Maybe somebody has a recommendation of a new game like that, but
yeah.
So yeah, class systems are freaking cool. So the other one I wanted to bring up as well that is like just such a huge trope, and this isn't just a JRPG thing, but amnesiac characters. Like why do all these characters have amnesia walking around? Yeah.
I gotta defeat the evil king.
Yeah. Who am I?
Yeah.
Where did I come from? So like obviously like Final Fantasy does this quite a lot. What I'm curious to ask you, because I know you played Persona 5 but not Royal yet. Or did you start it?
I started Royal, but I'm playing it on very hard. So I almost died on like the first encounter.
No, don't do that, dude. You're never gonna finish it.
I know.
But Morgana is kind of like a amnesiac character. Like he's like, oh yeah, I remember blah blah blah. It's like I don't want to spoil anything, but he keeps like bringing up stuff he remembers. And what's cool that I know about Royal is they dive more into him.
Okay.
In the part like that's added, and it gets nuts, dude.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for you to see what happens.
I gotta play it again.
Yeah. But what do you think in general? I guess let me just list a couple. So Cloud from FF7, Amnesia. Terra from FF6, Amnesia. Morgana. I don't know if you probably never played World Ends With You, right?
No, I haven't.
That was another Tetsuya Nomura game. So yeah, he has amnesia. Roxas from Kingdom Hearts.
That's the guy that I got confused with.
Yeah,
right?
Sora. Everybody's Sora to you, right?
Everyone's Sora.
Yeah. And the main character from Xenogears, I don't remember his name. I never beat that one, at least not yet. Yeah. But that was another one that it's like, you know, they just like, oh, you know who else? Wait, does he? Actually, I'm going to bring up another example of something that flipped this on its head. So in Chrono Cross, which is like kind of sort of the sequel to Chrono Trigger, the main character doesn't have amnesia. But what happens is something happens. He goes back to his hometown and everybody doesn't know who he is.
Oh, interesting.
So then the whole game kind of plays out where you're just like a stranger in the world that you know.
Dragon Quest 11 too?
Did it?
I think it happened. You beat Dragon Quest 11?
I did.
I think there's a point where you go like back to your town and they're like, "Who are you?"
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That was cool.
I like that. That's cool.
That was cool.
It's a little harder to implement because it's like you're not one character, you're multiple that are. It's almost like a different timeline. Kinda. So I think that's pretty sweet.
But what do you think about amnesia as a mechanic for storytelling in general? Are you into it?
I mean, I'm not like totally against it. I think it has its place, you know?
Yeah.
I think if like, you know, every 1 out of like 5 games there's a character with amnesia, it's okay. As long as it's not like every other game is a character with amnesia. Is every so often you're going to have a character with amnesia, right? But I think like it's an interesting way to obscure the hero's past in the sense where you need to discover his past as you go. So I think that in that sense, amnesia could be a useful tool for story writing. But, you know, a lot of times I feel like it is a bit of a cop-out in the sense that, you know, I don't want to call anybody lazy, but I feel like maybe there wasn't enough time put into thinking about a character's history or putting it all together. Or maybe it's there and it just takes you the whole game to just discover it, and which I'm more of a fan of. But
I think there's ways to do it that makes it more interesting. So like, I'm not going to spoil anything, but like clearly like Cloud is not remembering certain things, but it's not like he doesn't know who he is at all throughout the game. Like he definitely like there's even memories of his childhood. It's just like his memory's kind of fuzzy. So that's kind of cool. Also, the game's like over 20 years old now. So I feel like nowadays to have a amnesia character, it's like you have to have an interesting spin on it to make it feel, like you said, not like a cop-out. But what we did in our game, we didn't make the character have amnesia, but we kind of are revealing the character's past by him narrating throughout. So I felt like that was a way for us to still have that feel of like the player is like, whoa, what's happening?
He's kind of like a blank slate at first.
Yeah. But then more and more gets revealed to you in that way. But he himself very much knows who he is, but he's not necessarily telling us everything from the beginning. So I think, that's been kind of a fun way to write his character too, I think, for us, because we can kind of be like, oh, well, this thing then happened to him, and we can kind of reveal that at this point in the game that makes sense with something else. So that's been pretty fun to write. So going off of the amnesia character, I feel like this is something that's kind of related to that. But what do you think about a silent protagonist? Because that's another JRPG trope, storytelling trope.
I really just don't get it. I don't know, like, I wish somebody who designs these characters can explain to me their thought process and intention. I guess if I were to interpret it, I would say a character that's a silent protagonist is supposed to be, you know, somebody that, like, let's say you don't want to be identified as a person with a masculine voice. You can kind of give that character your own voice. Or, you know, I don't really speak as my own character when I'm playing a silent protagonist game, but, you know, I think it basically gives people a chance to interpret the character as they want to. And I think that's an interesting take at times. Maybe not every character needs a voice. Or maybe the character speaks through its, you know, their actions, or based on the environment that they're in, right? So I think sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Like, I really wish they gave Link a voice.
I know. I'm ready for him to have a voice as well, dude.
And he doesn't need to say much. He can just say a couple things, but
I think what's especially weird for me in certain JRPGs is when you have a whole party of characters and they're all talking to each other, and then they talk to you and the camera just zooms into you and your character's just like, and then it gives an option of like, do the thing or don't do the thing. And it's kind of like, I don't know, man. It's like in certain games that have very heavy dialogue, it's like, come on, just like let the character talk. Like I get, and I agree with what you're saying. I think that the reason for it is so that the player can be like, I'm the hero on the journey or whatever. So I guess an example of where I think it works is probably Pokemon, because it's like character doesn't really need to. Although, I mean, if they made a Pokemon game where the character was like really interesting and had a backstory, it would probably elevate the game in general.
Yeah, I think so.
In my opinion,
I think you could relate more to being a Pokemon master if the character you are has troubles that he deals with in day-to-day life alongside catching Pokemon. I'd say that's more mature Pokemon game because a lot of kids playing these games, they honestly don't care about that stuff.
But I don't know, man. Even when I was a kid, I still liked stories, and I still wanted to feel.
Yeah, but when we were younger, when we were like 7 to like 12 or 13, like we didn't really care about that stuff. I think once we got to like high school and stuff, we actually started being like, whoa,
but you did because
cool.
It's like, why you're interested in Ash from the show, for example, because he's like, you can relate to him. Like, oh, I'm late for school. I'm late for whatever. Oh, I only have Pikachu left to pick.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's like due to like this is geared towards kids because like Dragon Quest is another example of that. It's like they're always silent protagonists, and it's kind of like that's an example where I think they should definitely give the main character a voice. But I think some of these things too are just like they've had a history of doing it a certain way, and like with Link too, right? Like they're used to doing it, and I don't know if they just feel weird like flipping that on its head or afraid they're gonna piss people off. But I think more people would be welcome to that after 20 years instead of just doing the same thing.
Yeah. Because usually it's like the character is asking you a question. They're like, did you defeat the evil monster in the lair?
Yeah.
And it's like, ...
Yeah.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
Well, here's 10 coins.
What was kind of an interesting take on it is in Persona 5, the character is essentially a silent protagonist, but there's a couple times throughout the game where he says something. And it's like, you're always like, whoa, was it really him that just talked?
Right.
But
or he like strikes a pose and then it like does like the and then like back to default type of thing.
Yeah, so in terms of I don't know, silent protagonist, I'd put that under the bad mechanic category in my personal opinion.
Let's talk about I'll do the next one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right, now let's talk about one of the most highly contested topics in JRPGs, grinding.
Yeah. I almost feel like grinding is a like legacy JRPG mechanic.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's a way for developers to be like, you little pest, like go level up and come back when you're stronger.
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it's just way out of pocket. Like they make you train for, I don't know, you could be grinding for days before you're ready. I kind of like that about the original Pokemon games actually, because I really felt like you had to like go back and like grind a bit to become strong enough. And when you beat the gym leaders, it was like, wow, I grinded and my efforts paid off.
Well, I'm actually replaying. I'm actually not replaying. I'm playing Fire Red right now. And what's interesting about the concept of grinding in old school Pokemon is it's not even just to get stronger, but like let's say you pick Charmander at first. It's you like can't beat Brock with Charmander, right?
Right.
So you have to find other Pokemon. You have to level them up enough to get certain abilities that are the Rock Pokemon are weak to. So that's kind of cool, but I agree and disagree with you because on one hand, I like that as a concept. On the other hand, it shouldn't take me 3 hours to freaking just run in the little grass over and over and over again. No,
I agree. Yeah.
If the combat's more flexible and fun and whatever.
Here's the thing, like, man, I'm about to go on a tangent.
do it.
Well, all right, so Pokemon Shining Pearl. I mean, this game is just literally the worst Pokemon game I've ever played.
Okay.
And I'm playing it anyway.
That's the remaster.
That's the remaster on Switch, and it's just such a turd. I mean, like, it's so bad. Like, first of all, the movement mechanics are absolutely horrible. Like, you try to move around, and the bike is literally unusable because it goes like. It has like an acceleration. So if you hold it for like a second, it just like shoots you into the wall.
Oh,
and then you have to like turn around and then So anyway, aside from that, the experience share is always on. You can't turn it off. So I have the grass starter and I literally didn't even I used him twice and he already evolved twice. I swear, dude. I only used him twice and he evolved to his final evolution. Yeah. Because I wanted to use my other Pokemon. Yeah. But like he literally evolved through 2 stages and I only used them once in like each stage.
Yeah.
And like it just seems so lame. Dumb to me, you know what I mean? It just made no sense. And in that game, it's like you don't even need to grind. You know, it's like everything is just kind of easy. And what I wanted to get to was talking about the gym leaders, of course, was I feel like I just rolled through the gym leaders. Like it was like, okay, next one.
Yeah.
With the older games, it was like, all right, I got to train to beat the next gym leader.
Yeah.
You know, and then I go and do like this mysterious dark quest with Team Rocket or whatever, and then I get stronger. I get some new TMs. I can use the TMs. And granted, they've made a lot of changes in Pokemon that are good, in my opinion. But in terms of the gym leaders, I feel like, you know, grinding to beat them, it just doesn't feel rewarding anymore. You know?
I think this actually goes back to our first episode when we were like hardcore talking about Pokemon and talking about the type stuff. So like what I'm realizing is when there was such a limited set of Pokemon, it was kind of like they curated the area before the gym leader to be like, okay, there's only going to be like one that you could find in the grass that's going to really be advantageous to that specific person, right? And it's kind of like you have to go out of your way to try to find that Pokemon, level it up to get the skill, whatever. And it felt like I guess that's a good word for it, is curated each zone. Whereas the new ones, especially when they're open world, it's like, okay, you're about to approach a fire gym leader. It's like you have 50 options of water Pokemon to find before you even get to them, and then it's like, of course you're gonna crush them. You know.
But I also liked in the older game, I actually didn't like this in the older games where it's like it was so monotone, like the typing. It was so hard to find like a water type in the wild or a fire type. It's like everything was just a normal, a flying, and then they introduced dark, and everything had to be a dark type. And
I think there's like definitely a good balance, and I haven't played enough of them throughout the years to like know which one I thought was the best for that. But I think like on a conceptual level, what would be ideal is and going back to the topic of grinding in general, is like, yeah, it's like you shouldn't just be blowing through the bosses in the game, but I do think that there's definitely a level of too much grinding as well, I guess is what I want to say.
No, definitely. And we've seen games like Sea of Stars, for example, where I don't think I grinded once.
Yeah.
It was because, you know...
But you still had a good amount of combat.
Right.
Right?
No, it was like the perfect level of combat and the perfect level of, you know, leveling. And also on top of that, like the weapon system was very simple, which I actually really appreciated. Because I feel like in a lot of games, and I think Final Fantasy does this, where it's like, you get like a bunch of stats in one point, but you lose a bunch of stats in another. But in Sea of Stars, it was like you were just leveling your attack stat, or like whatever stats you had. It would always be an upgrade, no matter which. Once you got the next level, you didn't lose anything for your other stats.
You don't lose stats in Final Fantasy.
Well, like for example, if a weapon gives you like a bunch of spirit.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So it will like raise your attack but lower your magic.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I kind of get that because it's like that lets you be a lot more specialized.
Yeah.
But in Sea of Stars, there was none of that. It was very simple, and I actually appreciated that for once. I don't think it's good for every game to have that, but I think that in Sea of Stars, they pulled it off so perfectly where like you work hard, you either find the next weapon or you have to buy it. But that kind of let you keep up with the monsters of the game as they progressed. And you could defeat them, and then you felt more powerful, and it just, you know, there was no need to just sit there and grind.
Yeah, I think that especially more modern games are finding a better way to balance the getting around grinding while still making it feel like you're doing the appropriate amount of combat throughout.
Yeah.
That's another thing, again, going back to our game, and it's like we've just played so many we really like JRPGs, so I think we've added a lot of that stuff into Traveler's Refrain, or at least the concepts of it, but we're also trying to build that game in a way where it's like you can grind to get to level up more of your skills, but we're kind of being very careful about spacing out the enemies so you feel like by the time you get to the boss, like you should be able to beat it. But if you're having trouble, you have the opportunity to grind.
Right.
I think that's actually probably the perfect scenario for grinding. Obviously, we're not talking about like super bosses and stuff like that because that's a different topic for grinding. But for the main experience, I think that's probably perfect. It's like you get to the boss, as long as you've been fighting the stuff along the way, you should have a chance of beating it. But if you're like, I'm kind of stuck, you should have the opportunity to go back and kind of level your guy up a little bit more.
Yeah.
So yeah, going back to Sea of Stars too, and I know like Dragon Quest XI introduced this, and that was like a big change. It's like, what do you think about the enemies like being on the map as opposed to just like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good change overall. Yeah. I do. Yeah, at first I kind of fought it because I was like, this is like so new school.
Yeah.
And then the more I played it, I was like, all right, like I want to fight now and I want to fight that right there.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that aspect because I think a lot of us from like the 90s are just like, we have PTSD from like going
yeah, dude.
Going through the water and like, I don't know, some random Pokemon village and it's like, and it's like it's like a stupid tentacle, and then it's like you go like 2 feet, it's like tentacle. It's like, all right, dude. And so, you know, you're just literally finding like 5 tentacles before you cross this little like body of water. And you're like, and another thing is they're all like, you could be like level 30 and they're all like level 17. You're like, it's so useless. Like, why are they?
I know.
Oh man, the older games did that where they just gave you like, the Pokemon were just so much lower level than what you needed. But that helped with the grinding aspect, right? Going back to grinding. But overall, I'd say I think it's pretty sweet that you can see the Pokemon in the wild. I did think that it was cool back in Gold and Silver era. The legendary dogs were hidden in the grass.
Yeah, that was like so frustrating though. Yeah. And then if you find them but don't catch them, didn't they appear as little icons on the map so you could track them? Or could you track them from the beginning? It showed you kind of where they were.
You had to encounter them randomly first.
That's right.
And then once you randomly encountered them, it showed a little, I can't remember if it showed their head or if it was just like a little blinking thing.
Yeah.
I think it was their head.
Yeah.
But you could see, and then as you moved around, they would move. And
yeah.
I never really memorized the patterns.
But I feel like if they were to make that game today, there's a way to do it where it's like you'd still like, I mean, imagine how cool that would be if you're just kind of walking in an area and you saw one of them just there.
Yeah, well, Legends Arceus kind of did this, right? Because you'd be walking around and you just randomly saw a shiny Pokemon.
That's true.
So that's, I guess, the most relatable thing. It's like, wait, that Pokemon's not supposed to be that color.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think they did a little glint when you'd walk up to them as well to kind of show you, like, okay, you should catch this one.
Right.
Yeah,
I think they did a good job in that game of that.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, I definitely have some nostalgia. I also think though, like, it depends on the game and it depends on how fast it gets you into combat, because that was one of the biggest headaches for me with the let's call them the middle range Final Fantasy games like 7, 8, and 9. 9 was particularly bad, where it was like, just the PS1, dude, was so slow. So getting into the battle, and then all the moves were slow, and then getting out of the battle.
Right.
You know, just that was like 3/4 of the time played was just like battling. So
what's your favorite word?
What?
Slog.
Yeah. Kind of a
games
slog.
Are a slog.
Yeah, if a game is a slog, then it sucks. But
yeah, if the total time for you to like complete a battle is more than a minute.
That's I'd even say like 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
It kind of depends.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too, and maybe this is something else to bring up, but like old school Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3, let's just say, is like you're just freaking hitting attack. Like that's all you're doing. And your MP or your notches are so limited that you're not even really casting spells. You know, you kind of have to save that stuff for the bosses. So what do you think about that?
Saving your stuff for the bosses?
No, like the fact that there's a lot of JRPGs where it's like all you do is hit the attack button over and over.
Yeah, I think that's a developer error, honestly, because they allow for that behavior to happen. Like there's no punishment for it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these games are like so old that was like just the way they did it, but I
sometimes I kind of liked it, like secretly, because I'm just like
it's just like kind of like soothing, I guess. Like you can kind of just like chill out and just like run around and just like attack.
Yeah.
But it's like
your party's like health goes down, you heal them, and then you just keep going.
Yeah. But it's like you get so many cool moves in a lot of these old RPGs, it feels like you barely even get to use them.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
Well, okay, here's a question for you. Games that have a poison mechanic, like you can poison something else or you can debuff something else. Do you use debuffs and poisons?
I do actually.
Really?
I like this goes back to that chat we had about like different gamer types.
Yeah.
But I will use things to my advantage to like cripple my opponents and like deal max damage if I can.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think it has its place. Obviously, like you don't want to use a poison attack in like a short battle. This was a really good example was from Dragon Quest XI because who was the jester guy? I forget his name. But he had a build that you could go down that was basically like if your enemy is poisoned, this attack deals double damage. So basically, you would envenom the target, and then you would use a special dagger attack that would like do double damage or triple damage. And it worked really well for long battles because not only is the boss taking a lot of damage, it might do like a little bit of damage up front, but over the course of the battle, it really like adds up. And also you compound the damage with this like dagger strike that it says when the enemy is poisoned, deal extra damage, which I took full advantage of.
You like doing that kind of stuff. That I think it's interesting to have those kinds of builds where you can like you do this to do this to do this sort of thing, but like generally with the poisoning and like even debuffing, it's like I very very rarely use. It's like I just I tank my way through turn-based games so hard, dude. Or I will buff my character. I'm more of like I'll buff my own character than debuff the enemy.
Have you ever used the move Growl in Pokemon?
Why would you ever use that?
There's a use for it.
Okay, I will say, you know what I did use on Brock this time when I was playing Fire Red? No, I used Sand Attack.
Oh, okay.
Because they were just like annihilating me with their hits. So like they just could barely ever hit me.
Yeah.
Like the accuracy on that, like, or the accuracy debuff is actually like really good.
In the older games, I think it was a lot more than the modern games.
Yeah.
I think in the modern games, it's kind of
it like doesn't even do anything.
You need to land like 2 or 3 sand attacks. Actually
does it stack?
Yeah.
Oh,
it stacks up to 6 times for everything.
I literally
in the positive and the negative direction.
Oh.
So like a move like Screech lowers your opponent's defense by 2 levels. So it goes -1. But a move like Tail Whip only goes -0.5.
Oh, interesting.
Or it'd be like -1 versus -2 or something like that.
I see.
So
that's cool. Oh, this is just a little fun fact for you, but going back to the enemies on the map thing. So actually Chrono Trigger, I don't know if this was the first example of this, but they had the enemies just walking around the map, and you would just like walk up to them and your characters kind of jump out. That's where Sea of Stars like got its combat system essentially. But I remember playing Chrono Trigger back in the day and being like, this is such a welcome change, because I think at the time I played that, there were very little other examples of seeing the enemies on the map in a turn-based game. So yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Before
we talk about pacing, Nick, I have a pop quiz for you. What is good against fairy?
Didn't I say what is steel good against? What is fairy good against? But isn't steel good against fairy or something?
That's one out of the 2. What's the other one?
Wait, somebody said it in the comments, and they were like, the way the thought process is it's due to like mythology or something like that. Is it dark?
No.
What is the other one?
The other one is, we just talked about it actually.
Poison.
Right.
I don't know. Somebody said something in the comments. I forget what it was, but they were basically saying like, yeah, like in mythology, you know, blah 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 is afraid of fairy, or fairies are afraid of this thing or something.
I think it's like it was people build like the mechanical towers, and it like gets rid of all the magic or something. Fairy magic. Right? Something like that?
No, dude. I don't know. You just made that up.
No, I was like, I'm pretty sure I was in the comments.
Okay, so one thing that I think this isn't necessarily a mechanic, but it's just kind of like what do you call it? Just like the way these games work sometimes. And I think it's something that mechanics make this an issue a lot of times, is pacing in JRPGs. Because I've played a lot of JRPGs where I've kind of just fallen off the bandwagon, And I can appreciate a long game. Like I put 170 hours into Tears of the Kingdom, but it's because there was something to do for that entire time.
Right.
A lot of times with JRPGs, you get into this like rut where you're just kind of like you're either grinding too much or something is like kind of stagnant or like the map is just too big, and this is mostly like older games obviously, but one I can think of off the top of my head is Xenogears. I never beat because I have you ever played games where you like started it multiple times and you just cannot get through it?
Well, for me, it's more I start and I'm like, what the hell was I doing last time?
Yeah, but do you restart it sometimes?
Sometimes.
Yeah. So like I literally restarted that game maybe 3 times and I still like can never get through it. And it's like I want to like it. I like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, like I don't even know necessarily what that was with that game, but yeah, there's definitely instances in JRPGs where it's like you get to this point, you're just like, oh, like boring or something like that. You know? Do you have any examples of games like that?
I think there's a lot of examples. I can think off the bat like the Final Fantasy games are really like that, especially the older ones. FF1. FF2 was a weird one.
With some of that's something about those games though, because they're not very long, honestly. But in my opinion, nowadays, what makes those old ones more fun is if you kind of know where you're going already, or if you just like play it with kind of a general guide to like know, okay, I go to this town next, because that is the problem with some of those old ones is like they don't give you instruction necessarily on where to go, or it's like you have to find the one guy in the one town that's like, go to this town with a weird name and then you'll be able to proceed your entire adventure, or like you need like a weird item to like I remember specifically in FF1 you need like dynamite at some point to blow up the thing in the like gnome cavern like get through or whatever. It's just so random. So for me, it's been more just like when a game is so long and then you get to a point where it's just like there's nothing to do and you still know you have like 80 hours left.
I think it's important that a lot of these games that have mechanics like this that are spread out kind of incorporate other game mechanics as you play. Like in Persona, you're like a student and you have to like build relationships with people and, you know, attend classes and do all this other stuff. It kind of fills in that gap of progression, or what's the word?
Pacing.
Yeah. Kind of fills in that pacing a bit. And then at some point you're just kind of like itching for a fight and it kind of jumps into a fight section. So I think that is like kind of not giving too much of something all at once and giving the player like an option to do other things is definitely what makes the games more fun.
And I think going back to our game too, this is something we've kind of learned by just being gamers that we've tried our best to incorporate in Traveler's Refrain is like, we've literally thought through like, okay, you just did some combat, we should do some story stuff now, or you should do some like puzzle stuff or whatever. And we try to, I would probably say if we like actually timed it out, every 20 minutes, you're doing a different thing.
Yeah.
Like, almost on the dot because we've like timed ourselves, you know? So yeah, I definitely agree that like Persona is actually a really good example of that because it's a massive game and the only way to get through it is by like varying up what you're doing all the time, or else you're just going to be bored with that combat system for so long. So yeah, that I guess that's something really quick I want to ask as well, and leading me into another thing that I think is good or interesting with some turn-based games, but like, is turn-based combat just like not as fun as action-based combat? You know, I think to myself sometimes like if I actually feel like that or not.
Yeah, I think there's a weird line in between too of like, you know, those action or the JRPGs where there's like a timer before like the enemy does a move. ATB system. Yeah. So I think there's also a in between there of action ATB and traditional JRPG. Because I kind of like a bit of ATB every now and then because it kind of forces you to like be on the ball.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I can get 2 moves in before the boss does his next move.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I kind of like the lax nature of all the older JRPGs because you can kind of sit there and think for a minute and come up with like a very elaborate plan. But I feel like with ATB combat systems, you're just kind of like, holy crap, I gotta like figure out the next thing to do and quick before I'm dead, which also kind of makes it a little exciting too, but kind of has to keep you on your toes for a lot of it. So I think that's the trade-off really. And in terms of action games, the thing with that one is you can reposition your character, which adds a whole new element to the game. Like in Final Fantasy VII Remake, you can run behind the pillars and like block like the giant boss attacks.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, I'm gonna switch to this character, stun the enemy, then I come around the cover and like.
Well, that game too. What's interesting and honestly, FF7 Remake Rebirth has my favorite combat system of any game. I think I've maybe said this on the podcast before because it really does feel like that marriage between turn-based and action because you can pause and or like slow down time and sift through your moves, and it feels very tactical that way. I think the issue with some of the other like an example is like FF16 that like pretty much went full action is your moves have to be so limited because there's only a certain amount of things you can map to the buttons, right? But like in an old school RPG, you can have like 50 spells, you know, because you can take your time. So that's been the biggest trade-off for me because I like being very tactical as well. And I like the like variety of cool moves. Like you're a player that likes to deal poison, so that's like an option for you. And going back to, I know this isn't necessarily a JRPG, but Dragon Age, all of them had a pretty good way of including a lot of variety in the move sets while still kind of being action games. So and it's just kind of interesting to think about. So going off of that as well, the other interesting mechanic I've played in a couple games, and I know Sea of Stars incorporated some of this as well, is like a timing based system with your turn-based attacks. So a game I played back in the day, shout out to anybody else that's played this freaking old ass PS1 game, but Legend of Dragoon had a really cool system where your character would you know, you'd click attack, he'd run up and he'd swing, and there'd be a reticle that would like go in, and when it hit a certain point, you had the opportunity to hit X again, and you would do another swing. And there's other games like I think Paper Mario does this, but I know the Mario and Luigi games do that as well. I think it's kind of fun, but it's also I'm like kind of torn because sometimes, like we were saying, it's nice to just sit back and be like, A. But when you're like, okay, I gotta think about the timing, you're like panicking every single battle. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think it needs to be. What I liked about it in Sea of Stars was that it didn't feel overpowered. It just felt. It felt satisfying, but it wasn't like. It basically was just a little bit of a supplement. And it wasn't like this overpowering mechanic that really like, okay, you're, you know, the god of timing your attacks and you just one shot everything. But I think that it made for that extra little bump that like players crave in damage. They get that with that timing, and it feels fun. I didn't play with that little like thing that pops up in the air. It kind of like annoyed me. But I found it to be really cool mechanic.
It just gives you something a little extra to do. I think in general it's not the best example of games like that I've done. It felt like some of the timings are like kind of like, I don't know, just like not super clear or something like that. And I get that's part of like learning the system, but
what do you think about like quick time events in combat in action games like that, or JRPGs? Like you have a chance to like dodge something. Have you played any games like that?
Yeah, I think it's been more in action games though. It depends. Like FF16 had stuff like that. It added a lot, but it was like, because what you're watching is so visually like extraordinary, it was cool because it really felt like you were like playing a movie. But I don't know. Sometimes it can be a cop out.
Well, in Sea of Stars 2, you could also block the moves.
That's true.
Which was
that's cool too.
Really interesting. Yeah.
I don't know if I'd I wouldn't really call it a quick time event. That's more like integrated into the combat itself.
Right.
Quick time events, I'm thinking like it's like you're just watching a cutscene and then suddenly it's like press X, or like Leon needs to roll out of the way from the boulder or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Rip
to the QTEs from RE4 remake.
Oh my god. Oh wait, did they take them out?
They took them out. They took out most of them. I think there was like one or two.
Oh, I'm surprised actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is another thing that goes just back to combat in general. And I think most of this conversation has been about combat, but I think that's because in JRPGs, that's like what you're kind of doing most of the time besides talking. But like in Pokemon and stuff like that, dude, like status effects and stuff, it's like they gotta speed that stuff up, man. When you're just seeing like, you know, Pikachu's asleep, or whatever, it's like, okay, let's get going, you know.
Let's talk about Shining Pearl again real quick.
Okay, go for it.
I hate that game. But yeah, in Shining Pearl, it's like you go into a battle. It's like Onyx is worried that it's not going to be able to fight well. It's like, okay, just fight, dude.
Grow up, Onyx.
Grow up, Onyx. And then like after you land like a crit, it's like, you know, like I have a Jirachi in my team. Jirachi landed a critical hit and would like to be praised for it. Like,
but I haven't played that game yet, so it's like, what does that do?
Nothing. Literally nothing. At least in my understanding.
It's like, do you have to like go in and like pet Onyx to make him feel better or something like that?
Maybe. Honestly,
like,
I think you can. Yeah, I honestly just. Maybe it's just the product of my age, and like maybe when I was younger, I probably would have fooled around with that stuff a little more. One of the things that really pisses me off is when the Pokemon like survive with 1 HP, and it says your Pokemon really loves you, so it survived with 1 HP, and I'm like, okay, thanks, but like I would rather the Pokemon just die if, like, you know.
I know what you mean.
Like, I don't need the game to save me. I can do that on my own.
Yeah. Okay, so sorry, I literally just thought of two other things that we didn't even list out that are like big JRPG mechanics that are like, I don't know if I like them. The one is freaking cooking. It's like fishing, dude.
Yeah.
I don't want to cook in a freaking video game. Like, I've never found that system to be fun. And I feel like 9 times out of 10, usually the way cooking mechanics work is you get ingredients, you cook a dish, and it gives you a buff. But it's like, my characters already have spells that buff them. Why the heck do I need to feed them some dumb food to buff them?
I think Sea of Stars, I'm going to talk about it again because they did a great job with the food system. I played it on hard, and because of that, I wasn't allowed to use items in combat. And my MP didn't regenerate at the campfires, and you can only regenerate up to half of your health. So you were basically forced to create food. Yeah. But you could also like stock up on some jam, use the jam, restore your mana, and then take a bunch of items with you into like the level. And you literally had to survive the battle to use your stuff. Yeah. You couldn't use it mid combat. So
yeah, I think in that game it's like, what was interesting about that is there's no potions. The food was the potions. Right. So that was, I guess, probably a very good example of that. And mechanics-wise, what that also allowed you to do was, in the world, there's so many ingredients to just like find. So you're constantly like running to just like click A and like pick stuff up, which is sometimes just like a nice feeling, like, oh, I've collected something, and then you can use it for something else. Right. Yeah, there's other games. I think, man, somebody's gonna have to correct me, but I think in you played FF15. Remember, cooking was a big mechanic in that.
Yeah, I don't think I did that. Ignis, right? He was the cook.
Yeah.
I don't think I really messed with the cooking system too much. But what did it give you buffs or something? I think so. Or like when you woke up in the next morning, you had like a buff.
That's right.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. So that was like, I don't know how I felt.
You had dinner with the boys at night.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know, story-wise, kind of cool. Yeah. Okay, the one I hated, though, dude.
What?
Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Oh. With the stupid sandwich going into his mouth. Yeah. That, we got to, like, put a little pit.
Turn him sideways. Like.
Yeah, he's just, like, ready to receive the sandwich. That was so freaking weird. It's like they had like stock art like behind him when his like little head was floating around ready to get the sandwich.
He's like in a Zen mode. Floating around.
I think I did that once and then I was just like you had to like build the sandwich. It's like
and the one homie's like obsessed with sandwiches. The Arvin, he's like obsessed with sandwiches. It's like, feed my dog the sandwich.
Dude, if they put the time, resources, and money into something actually good in that game, maybe it would have been a better game. Like, why'd they spend so much time on a sandwich building mechanic?
Yeah.
Who okayed that? Like, seriously.
There's also the you can go to the shops and buy sandwiches that like help you find certain Pokemon in the wild, which I think is kind of neat. But I never really.
I felt like I never needed to use it though. Like I feel like
if you're trying to find all the Pokemon in the wild, it helps. But
I guess I don't know. Maybe I just didn't use it to its advantage. But I feel like there's other ways to approach that kind of mechanic that could have been cooler. You know. And this is me sitting here like just analyzing some work that other people had done. But it's just like I don't know, man. That mechanic was like, this is so dumb to me and such a waste of time.
Yeah. You know, it was a really fun mechanic that I want to talk about is in Dragon Quest XI, they had that like blacksmithing mechanic where you can upgrade weapons on the forge. Did you ever do that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And like you had to know which abilities to use to perfectly make the weapon before it like broke or something. It went like over the line, the heat level. You could like preheat it, and then after that, all your hits were like doubled, and it was like something you just had to look at and know. There's no like direct like values. Maybe they were in the background, but you just kind of had to like be like, all right, I feel like this move is not going to put me on the edge.
I think that's just something interesting to talk about as a whole, but it's almost like incorporating some sort of like mini game type thing into a specialized system, because that's like what the sandwich building thing was, and that was stupid and annoying and like not fun. But yeah, that was cool, and I remember it wasn't frustrating. I think that's the best thing to think about is like, if something is going to be like a mini game main mechanic to help build your character in some way, like it should be interesting, but not take a lot of time either. Because it's like, otherwise you're like, I just want to play the freaking game, you know? But yeah, that was a good example of that.
Yeah, and I was just thinking of food mechanics in Zelda. You know, I didn't know that you could look at your recipes until like the last like 10 or 12 hours. I had no idea. So I like literally threw a bunch of shit into a pot, and then like it would come out as like the dubious food. I'm like, I could have swore I made this last time.
Oh my god,
it was so weird.
Yeah, well, it's because I don't think they had the recipes in Breath of the Wild. They added it in Tears of the Kingdom.
Okay.
So yeah,
but still, I was just like, I had no idea, and I was like, I was wasting ingredients at one point because I only needed like one truffle and like something else to build like the one that gives you all your health plus like one. All you needed to do was cook a truffle. That was it. But if you cook the truffle with like veggies, it gave you something even worse. It gave you like steamed like mushrooms with veggies, and it only gave you like 4 hearts.
Oh,
so it was funny. Like a weird thing that I don't know. I hate cooking in games, honestly.
Yeah, that's actually a good one to think about. I don't know. On one hand, it was kind of interesting, and again, it's like a supplement for just like getting potions. But it wasn't necessarily fun to go into my menu, like sift through hundreds of items and then like find them to cook. So I think maybe if there was a lot more of a limited like selection, maybe it would have been more fun. But that was one I didn't mind. But it could have maybe been better in my opinion.
I missed the old like hearts. You like collect hearts on the ground type of thing.
Yeah.
So
what about maybe we could talk about progression systems in JRPGs in general, because that's another thing that's like that can vary by like a lot. So I guess the first one we can maybe think about is like, okay, there is just straight leveling. You get experience points, you level up, and it auto levels your stats. And then the other way is like you get points that you can allocate to your base stats. So do you have a preference between those two?
Good question. I don't know if I've ever played a JRPG where you don't level up.
Well,
I think that's like a standard for JRPGs.
But like, for example, in well, I guess in yeah, I guess that's a good,
right? There's no JRPG where you don't level up your character, like an actual like numbered level.
Yeah, that's actually true. I guess if you get points, it's usually to go into like a skill tree or an ability system.
Right.
It's mostly Western RPGs that give you the stat based. Like you put a thing into attack, you put a thing into like intelligence or whatever.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. I like the
I guess that just in general, do you like one or the other? Like,
what was it? It was just direct leveling where you put things into stats, or one where you pick new moves?
No, you either get experience points and it auto upgrades your stats, or you're actually picking individual stats to.
I love picking the stats,
really?
Obviously, because you can really specialize your character. But I mean, I can understand why some of the old school games kind of just level you up as is.
I think for a JRPG too, since it's typically revolving around a party, it's like it would maybe get tedious if you had too much stat management for like 5 characters or whatever.
Thought too. Also, if you're managing like a warrior and you're allowed to give the warrior like spell bonus, and it's like the warrior doesn't really cast spells, so you could kind of be like handicapping yourself, not knowingly handicapping yourself. I know people who've played Pokemon and they didn't even realize that there's difference between special attacks and normal physical attacks. And based on your special attack versus your attack, they're 2 completely different stats.
Yeah.
If you use flamethrower, your attack stat means nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and people might level up their attack stat and then they use flamethrower and they're like, why is my flamethrower so terrible?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you have a Pokemon that specializes in attack versus special attack.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a similar case to this. It's like, maybe sometimes it's a good thing that the games auto level your stat to be the best for your class. And games like Diablo and things like that, they really encourage you to pick up items that fit your class and increase the best stats for your class. In World of Warcraft, it's really technical because there's some specific stats that you really want because they give you the biggest benefit.
Gotcha.
And the other ones are just kind of okay for you. Yeah. So going back to progression systems, what kind of progression systems do you prefer in terms of skill leveling? Do you prefer like the system in, I know Dragon Quest XI had a very robust leveling system, but do you prefer like how in Sea of Stars you kind of get like stat points you can add, or do you like picking like a specific ability and then kind of going down that tree of abilities?
That's a good question. Because what's been interesting in JRPGs that allow you to kind of diverge a little bit, it always never feels like it. So for example, here's a good one. So like Final Fantasy X has this thing called the sphere grid, and you get these little points that you can allocate, and the trees are like insanely huge. And basically it's a giant tree, and all of your characters have a node on different parts of the tree, and you can start leveling up their little spheres and start to kind of connect them. So like one character might get the cure spell first, and then like the other character, it's like you need to like wind him down to get to also be able to get that spell because it's more in the range of the one character. So I guess where I'm going with this is like, I feel like a lot of these types of games, if they're giving you kind of like a preset class, sometimes it doesn't feel like it's almost like they're giving you the illusion of being able to divert instead of actually feeling like you're really going in different directions. So like, I know this isn't a JRPG, but an example where it does this well is in the Souls games. You can start off with a warrior, but then really get your warrior into speccing into magic, or really speccing into like one way or another.
Kind of like in Elder Scrolls.
I haven't played too much of those games, but I think it's probably similar.
Yeah, you can start out as like a orc warrior, and then you kind of can develop your magic skills if you want.
Got it.
You're not specialized to do magic, but
yeah. But like I do think that Dragon Quest XI was a good example of being able to have like variation. I think personally, if there's a game where they're like, okay, this guy is the warrior, like they're kind of subconsciously telling you this person's the thief, whatever. Right. I'd rather just have a skill tree that's based around them than like making pretend like, oh, your thief is now going more in a spellcaster direction or whatever. Because then it really allows you to build a party based off of like very solid skill sets. Mm-hmm. And everybody kind of has like a known thing that they're supposed to do. So that's like a bit of a personal preference, but I don't know. I think you're probably more the opposite, right?
I mean, I like all of them. Mm-hmm. I think the fact that every game gives you a different one is a nice thing.
Yeah.
It gives you different
things to play around with.
Progression. You know what one really was kind of weird was FF7 Remake with like there were like different galaxies and you had to like rotate them. And I was like, damn, where was that? Like, one?
They actually got rid of that in Rebirth, and it is more of like in Dragon Quest, like a node based like branching tree. And what's actually kind of interesting about that game too that they're doing now is I think they realize that like, okay, you're not going to have the slots in your materia slot for every single character to have like ice, wind, electric, going back to the typing thing. So in these trees, you can actually have all of your characters have a base elemental spell of each type, but it's a lot weaker than like equipping a fire materia, but you can still cast a fire spell. It's just like a quick fire spell, basically.
I don't know if I like that, but
in certain situations,
that was kind of strategic.
It is, but there's so much materia in the new one that it's like you want to like use up your slots for stuff that's like, you know, HP increase or like certain I don't know, like buff spells or whatever, and then it's like you don't want to have like a slot for just fire for every single one of your guys, but because you're swapping out your party so much, you might encounter an enemy that's weak to fire. So you're like, oh, at least I have something fire related to use. So yeah, I'm kind of in between. I'm trying to think of JRPGs that have like more unique kind of skill up. Yeah, the Sphere Grid was the first one that came to mind. I think most of them I've played have been straightforward. Like you gain XP, you level up your character, and then realistically, what's helping your character grow is your equipment that you get to pick.
Yeah.
So maybe we can actually go on to that quickly as well as like the currency system and buying things in the shops, because kind of like you were saying before with Sea of Stars, it's like you go to a new town, you find the new weapons that are meant for your characters.
Yeah, you're like all excited. You show up in the new town. You're like, where the hell's the store?
Yeah. But
Where's
it's always
the armor shop.
It's always so like straightforward. So I like if there is a straightforward leveling system, that is kind of a cool way sometimes to switch around what your characters can do. And that's something really old school Final Fantasy games did, was like you can give a guy like a fire sword or like a blood sword that will like suck health from the enemy when you attack. So you can still kind of have a bit of a customization with your warrior, with your thief or whatever.
Yeah, the thing with weapon systems though is like sometimes you would have an effect like stealing life, right? But then you get the next upgrade and you lose that like life stealing ability. And you trade it out for more attack. But it kind of like feels bad to lose that.
Yeah.
I don't know, it kind of leaves me a little sad sometimes, but you know, I guess raw damage is always better.
I think integrating mechanics where you can improve your weapon through some sort of stats, and I feel like it's mostly Western RPGs that have mechanics like that. Like I think in
socketing,
like Dragon Age Inquisition had something
it might have had
right.
Well, you could, that one was awesome because you could find ores and stuff, and then, like you could smelt weapons, and then I think you could give them like different gems and things like that.
I think so. Yeah, and The Witcher 2 had something similar, right? Yeah, so that
they had like runes in Witcher or something, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting mechanic as well that I think could fit easily in more JRPGs as well. But what do you think about just like currency and like getting money in games as well? Because that can vary quite a lot. Like you can get screwed in Pokemon if you just spend all your money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean you got to get paid. Right? You like show up to the first person in Pallet Town, you're like you beat them, but then you like beat them up and take their lunch money too.
Yeah.
It's like you got $1,000 for beating like Timmy in the ground.
Timmy the bug catcher.
Timmy the bug catcher dropped $1,000 when you beat him. That was always kind of weird to me how that like trainers gave you money when you beat them.
Yeah.
So I found that to be a weird concept, but I think in general currency is good. I think what makes currency fun is scarcity, because
I agree. Yeah.
Then you like, for me, for instance, when I play JRPGs, I usually skip a town when I get armor and weapons, because then I can, if I'm getting the weapons from every town, I'll eventually get to a point where I don't have enough money.
Yeah.
And if I don't have enough money to buy weapons when I need them, that's when I start to get like annoyed, because I might hit a stretch of the game where like I need to upgrade my stuff.
Yeah.
And I just don't have the money for it. So what I try to do is I stagger the towns, and I try to ensure that by the time I get to the next one, I'll have enough money to get the next upgrade if I need it.
That's an interesting strategy.
And that way I always have money to spend on other things that I need throughout the game.
Yeah. I feel like in most JRPGs, by halfway through the game, I have so much money. It's like you don't even know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think definitely scarcity, or the other cool systems that I've played as well is like enemies don't drop money. They drop items like bones or skins or whatever, and then you have to sell them, or you have to turn them into something to sell. I think those are really cool kinds of mechanics, because then it's like again, it's almost like a mini game in itself, like a little strategic game.
I mean, I know Resident Evil 4 is not a JRPG, but that game was like, you'd find like special treasures, and then you could slot the treasures with gems and then sell them for like triple the value.
Yeah.
And I really like that aspect of buying and selling. I feel like if you get something really interesting, you have a choice of either using it or selling it. So in World of Warcraft, there's like a binding systems. So like either you have to choose whether you want to like sell an item or use it. If you use it, it becomes bound to you. You can't sell it to anybody anymore.
Interesting.
So that's also another interesting thing. But I think games just need to be careful with how they pace money, because I forget what game I played recently. I felt like I had so much money, and I was just like, what is the point of the money?
Yeah.
If you can't even
spend it all.
Either you can't spend it all, or it means nothing.
Yeah, well, that's something I wanted to lead into with what you buy with the money. What do you think about consumables in games?
Consumables like potions and things. I think they're okay. I'd rather cast my spells to heal.
Me too.
Yeah, but I will say there are moments where the healer goes down, and then it's like full on panic mode.
Sure.
Like, you get hit by a boss, and all of a sudden, like the white mage drops. You're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And then it's like, if you have a red mage that can, like a hybrid healer class, you can kind of like make do.
Yeah.
But like at a certain point in the battle, you're just like, shit, I just lost my white mage.
Yeah.
I'm either gonna like have to do like come back, use a potion to revive them, like a Phoenix down or something, and try to like dog it out, or I'm just gonna go full on offensive and just like try to like nuke the boss down.
Yep. It's always when the boss has like 3 hits left that this happens.
And the most exciting battles, and I don't know, I think games are starting to do this more, is like they will like almost like help you win if it's like a close battle. They'll like let you live with 1 HP just so you can deliver the final blow.
Well, I was just gonna ask, what do you this is the opposite of that I know a lot of old games do. What do you think about when a boss targets you to piss you off? So, for example, right, your white mage goes down. You're like, all right, I'm going to use a Phoenix down. Raise your white mage. Boss hits her again, dead. And it just keeps doing that over and over, and you're just stuck in this cycle of just being totally screwed.
Yeah.
Do you like that?
I like when that happens, I'm just like, I'm just gonna go full offensive.
Turn off the Nintendo, turn it back
on. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have that tank character that you just like pray that the tank character gets beat up.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you see the boss starting to target, you're like, all right, dude, okay.
Yeah.
You have to change up your strategy at that point.
Definitely.
You have to go full offensive and just pray that you win.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works. So
I know.
you got to go for it, you know. Another thing too that I hate is when your team members die and they don't get XP.
Yeah.
You could be in a really long battle.
Yeah.
And like that character did so much to contribute in the battle.
Yeah.
But then they die like at the end and they get nothing.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like it actually because it incentivizes you to keep everybody healthy the whole battle.
I don't agree with that. I feel like it should be based on how much you contribute to the battle.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I guess. But yeah, that I can logically I can understand that. Yeah. But I don't know, it's more of an old school thing. You like your character dies, but then it's like if they die and they get full XP, it's like they died. Like why are they getting the same as everybody else?
Well, they don't. That's what I'm saying. They don't have to get the same as everybody else.
Yeah, if it's balanced based on. But I can
let's say they die, maybe it gets cut in half or something.
Sure.
But they should still get something.
Sure.
Not zero.
Yeah. I can see that. But I wanted to ask you really quick too. So like back to consumables. So there's more than just potions and stuff too. Like there's like stupid items like grenade or like something that like casts ice, and it's like I already have a guy that casts ice.
Yeah.
Like why do I need an item that does it? Like do you ever use that kind of stuff?
I actually do. Yeah.
Really?
I do.
You would use that.
I do because sometimes they like work really well.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't. But sometimes like in FF7, like I'm straight up out of mana.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, what else do I have?
Yeah.
What else? Like, because some of the abilities they give you like a fire effect.
Mm-hmm.
So you like toss it and it blows up and it does like a fire damage. And you're like, all right, I guess that was pretty nice.
I never use that stuff, dude.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I'm like such a freaking hoarder, dude. When there's like an X potion or like a one of those mega items, consumable items.
You never use it.
I never use it. And then I get to the final boss and I'm overpowered anyway.
Right.
And then I never use it anyway. I'm like, I need to save this just in case. And then I never use the item.
Yeah, like a full like party restore mana and everything.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, what's his face from Sea of Stars? The
cook guy?
No, the mage. What was his name?
I don't even know if I got him yet.
Yeah, you have him. He's the guy with the hood. I forget his name.
Dude, I don't have the only characters I have are the two main characters, the chef and the girl with the daggers.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait, I thought you were further than that.
I mean,
the guy that's in the library?
Yeah. That's where I just got to.
Oh.
Yeah. Is he the next
I thought
character?
You were further than that.
No.
Yeah.
I just got to that part.
Okay. I'm not going to spoil anything else then.
Right. Is he a cool character though?
Yeah, he's cool.
Okay.
All right. Never mind. He's pretty overpowered, but anyway, I did use a lot of those consumables. Sometimes they would just kind of sit in my bag and I'm like, what the hell is I like sit through and like read all of them and I'm like, okay, this does like fire damage or something or whatnot. So what are other consumables like speed ups and things like that?
Yeah, stuff like that. I like just like never use that stuff because it's always a consumable item that like you have the spell anyway. And I like to strategize my MP consumption instead of relying on items. But I'm just curious, like if there's actually gamers that, because there are certain types of play styles where it's like you could just use a bunch of items, or even certain classes like specialize in the use of items. So like a ninja uses throwing stars or whatever.
In FF3, that was actually, or it might have been one of those two, either 1 or 3. You could find these big shurikens, but there was only a limited number of them.
I know,
and they deal like 9999.
Yeah,
but it's like, what was the point?
I know, that's what I'm saying. I don't use that kind of stuff like ever.
Yeah.
In terms of MP systems though, what what's like your ideal system? Do you like a notch based system? Do you like MP? Do you like to be able to cast spells all the time, or do you like when it's like you kind of have to save it for a boss?
I like hybrid because I like being able to use the actual abilities throughout the game and not saving them for the boss. And I absolutely hate pip systems because I feel like they are so limiting in like using the abilities. You have to really pick and choose when you want to use them. And I feel like that takes a lot of fun out of it because you're always just thinking about when you're supposed to use it as opposed to just incorporating it into your everyday
And it's
battles.
also like, I have a black mage. I want to cast fire with my black mage.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to just like hit them with my stupid little wand that deals 2 damage.
Yeah, exactly. And I think having a mechanic that lets you regenerate mana in combat is a nice feeling. And you know, you cast the spells and then there's some way to kind of maybe after each battle you regain a little bit, right? And I think that keeps the pacing good. So you're not using it every battle, but you know, if like you said, like if you have black mage, like they're supposed to be using their abilities,
right?
You know? And maybe sometimes they're strong, sometimes they're weak, but you're still using them.
Yeah. Or
what about you?
Or even having a place to recover MP frequently. Like that's what's nice about the FF7 Rebirth remake, whatever, is they have the benches. So like they're like so frequent that like you're like, okay, I drained all my MP, I'm gonna go sit on them. But I think if you play, I forget how hard mode worked exactly, but I think it doesn't recover MP.
Yeah.
So you had to like play the whole chapter and really save it up for the boss at the end, which was, I don't know, kind of an interesting way to play it, but I like that wasn't the main playthrough mechanic. But that's something we've like really thought about with our game as well, because obviously we have all these spells that he can cast, and I think that this wasn't even a mechanic at first. Originally, we just had him restore his mana, his verve at the fountains, right? And then I think we decided like, okay, we want the player to like use this stuff a lot. So we were like, okay, he hits the enemies and there's a chance for them to drop a verve notch.
Based on how little you have left.
That was something you added on after, which pushed it even further, I think.
Yeah, because if you only used one pip, if you only use one notch, then like if you still have the same rate of getting, you know, getting it back, you're never gonna run out.
Exactly.
So there needs to be scarcity, and the rate needs to go up the less you have, because that way you're kind of like you really need it, and then you get it. You know.
And I think from playtesting too, we've gotten to that point where it feels like you can still cast a consistent amount of spells, but you can get yourself in a situation where you're like, oh my god, if I get hit one more time, I'm gonna die. I have nothing to heal myself with. So it's a good like management. The management feels good. Yeah. And I think just in general, games that have that balance of magic or MP management are the best ones. So
you just made me think of a weird mechanic for the game.
Yeah. Do you want to share it?
I guess I'll share it, but maybe we can cut it out. I don't really know. But if there's enemies that could put a curse on you, and in order to break the curse, you have to play a spell.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it like forces you to use the instrument.
Huh. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can talk about that one.
And when they curse you, they give you verve too, so you always will have a verve to play.
I see.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it could be an interesting mechanic.
Yeah. I think long story short for this whole episode is that what I think is so enjoyable about JRPGs is the fact that you have a bunch of characters to play with, and it's like the options are kind of endless in terms of how you want to build your mechanics. I feel like, going back to what I was saying before, a lot of games coming out nowadays, these big AAA games, like they kind of have a samey sort of feel over and over, like action-based games. Like you hit the buttons to attack, you have some abilities, there's always some sort of RPG light mechanic where there's like some very basic leveling system. And you know, from game to game, these things kind of vary, but I think with JRPGs specifically, it forces you to be very tactical with your choices, and that's what makes combat in itself pretty interesting and exciting. And some games obviously do it better than others, But I think that's what generally draws people back to JRPGs is they feel more like a tactician when they're playing instead of just like jamming on like swinging your sword or whatever. So yeah. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I really just hope that games continue to build off of the great mechanics and progression from Sea of Stars. I thought that was a great modern take on like everything we've learned from the JRPG universe, and I just want to keep seeing games that are bringing things like that to the table. Great storylines. I know we didn't really talk too much about story, but most of the JRPGs we play have really good storylines, and that's kind of part of the JRPG experience too, I think. So yeah, if you're a JRPG developer, I hope you can add on to the conversation that we've had today. Tell us your experiences of building JRPGs. Maybe tell us your favorite JRPG game. Maybe we missed something mechanics wise. So
yeah, awesome. All right, guys. Well, check out Traveler's Refrain on Steam, where you can wishlist now. That would really help us out. And be sure to subscribe on YouTube as well, so you can be updated when we put an episode out. We've been doing every Friday, just so you guys know. But yeah, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.